Good morning, everyone. My name is Angelica Daniel, representing Baltimore County Department of Public Works and Transportation. Welcome to the August meeting of the Technical Committee. This meeting is being recorded. If anyone online should experience technical difficulties during the meeting, please send a message to the chat box, and Regina will provide a short announcement.
Good morning, folks. Since our last meeting, we just had a couple of quick announcements. At the end of the meeting in July, Joel Gallahue informed us that that was his last meeting, and he apologizes that he didn't say goodbye to everybody, but he found it too emotional. But Joel has moved on and is working at the National Security Agency. So he's nearby at least. Also, I forgot to mention that we have a new member from the Maryland Department of Planning. That is Christina James. You might see her log in as Tina. So we wanted to welcome Tina. And for the BRTB, there is a new voting representative for public transit, and that is Jason Kwan from the RTA of Central Maryland. And just last, staff here would like to give a big thank you to all of the tech committee members for your tireless work helping with the conformity determination, the TIP, and the long range plan. The board voted unanimously on July 25th to approve those three documents, and they have been sent to the three federal agencies for sign off. So thank you very much for your work. And at that point, let's get back to Angie.
Thanks, Regina. At this time, I'm going to ask that Rebecca start the roll call to determine member participation. Rebecca?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. City of Annapolis?
Present.
Anne Arundel County?
Present.
Baltimore City? Anyone here this morning from Baltimore City? Baltimore County?
Present.
Carroll County?
Claire Stewart here.
Thank you. Harford County?
Here.
Howard County?
Here.
Queen Anne's County?
Here.
MDOT? Anyone here this morning from MDOT?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Maryland Department of the Environment? Maryland Department of Planning? MDOT MTA?
Here.
Thank you. MDOT SHA?
I responded twice.
I'm
This
sorry?
is MDOT here.
Okay, thank you. Did I miss anyone? Thanks so much.
Rebecca, Baltimore City is present.
Okay, thank you for letting me know.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our first item is the approval of the minutes from the July 5th meeting. The ICG has already reviewed and approved the air quality portion of the minutes. Now, has everyone on the technical committee had a chance to review the minutes? Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Queen Anne's County will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Queen Anne's County.
Howard County
Can I get a
seconds.
second? Howard County seconds. Thank you. We will now vote on the approval of the minutes. At this time, I'll ask Rebecca again to start the roll call for approval.
Annapolis?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was that a yes for Annapolis? Anne Arundel County?
Aye.
Baltimore City?
Aye.
Baltimore County?
Aye.
Carroll County?
Aye.
Harford County?
Aye.
Howard County?
Aye.
Queen Anne's County?
Aye.
and MDOT? Was that a yes for MDOT? Thank you.
The minutes are now approved. We will now move on to the action items. The recommended action is for resolution 24-3. For information on this resolution, which involves recommendations for the Transportation Alternatives Grants, I'll ask Charlene to introduce the resolution. Charlene?
Good morning. Let me get my screen shared. Regina, I'm not able to share my screen right now, the current settings. Thank you. While we figure that out, I'm Charlie Means, the active transportation planner at Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and we'll be presenting on the Transportation Alternatives FY 2024 applications and recommendations for funding. Let me share my screen. Thank you. Wonderful. I want to say thank you for having me today. So the applications for the TA program were due in mid-May this year. MDOT, SHA, and BMC staff reviewed the applications and conducted site visits as needed in coordination with the applicants. The funds available in fiscal year 2024 for the Baltimore region include $4,438,487. 4 applications were received, totaling $12,054,000 in requests. Funds available for the Aberdeen, Bel Air South, and Bel Air North area for this year include $430,525. No applications were received for that area this year. Let's see. So I'll present the projects that were submitted for the Baltimore region. First one here is Anne Arundel County submitted an application to construct an extension of the existing BWI spur. The 1.2 mile shared use path would travel through Lincoln from Maple Road to the Nursery Road light rail station for a total cost of $8,800,000 with a 20% local match. As stated in the application, the purpose of the project is to provide safe access for pedestrian and bicyclists living in one of the most underserved portions of the county, as identified by the county. The BWI trail spur does connect to the B&A trail, and with the extension will connect to another planned shared use path. It will also provide access to Nursery Road and the Lincoln light rail stations. Next. Anne Arundel County also submitted an application for construction of a shared use path and bicycle lanes on Shoreline Beach Road from Maryland 214 to Triton Beach Road, including intersection improvements. The project is approximately 1,500 feet long with the total cost of $475,000 with a 21% match. The purpose of the project, as included in the application, is to support connections to the connection of surrounding communities to the Beverly Triton Beach, supporting connection to commercial development and May Elementary, and to connect to a planned shared use path on Maryland 214. The next project is Howard County submitted an application for construction of a 1.4 mile long shared use path along Dobbin Road from Maryland 175 to Oakland Mills Road, as well as sidewalk improvements and new pedestrian crossings, with a total cost of $5,500,000 and a 20% match. The purpose of this project, as included application, is to provide separated bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure on a busy roadway, to provide access to jobs, education, shopping, restaurants, housing, and transit. And it connects to existing improvements on Oakland Mills Road and Dobbin Road, north of Maryland 175. The next project was submitted by Anne Arundel County for a Safe Routes to School program on accessibility studies, phase 2. It would be a feasibility study for a total cost of $306,000 with a 22% match. match. This program would extend work from phase 1 to look at more schools in this phase 2 section to perform safe routes to schools accessibility studies at 10 elementary schools and up to 10 middle schools in Anne Arundel County, with the purpose of identifying ways to increase the number of students walking to schools through the identification of physical or other barriers that prevent them from walking. And also to provide recommendations to overcome these barriers. The recommendation was for the Baltimore region was for funding for the Dobbin Road Shared Use Pathway, which had a request of $4 million, and the Safe Routes to School Accessibility Studies, which had the request for $240,000. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Just, was there a scoring or anything that we can see how we can approve future applications?
Yeah, Regina, do you have any comments on that, or we can follow up with you, Brian, afterwards, if that works well?
Yeah, that's fine, as long as we can get some guidance.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. I now ask for a member to move the approval for Resolution 24-3 and then a second.
MTA moves.
Anyone to second?
Annapolis, second.
Thank you, Annapolis. We now ask if members of the public have any questions or comments on the resolution. If so, please indicate you'd like to comment in the chat box. Regina, any comments or questions in the chat box?
No, not at this time.
All right, we will now vote on approval of the resolution that was recommended for the Transportation Alternatives Grants to BRTB. Rebecca?
Annapolis,
Aye.
Anne Arundel,
Aye.
Baltimore City,
Aye.
Baltimore County,
Aye.
Carroll County,
Aye.
Harford County,
Aye.
Howard County,
Aye.
Queen Anne's,
Aye.
and MDOT.
Aye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next up, we have UPWP activity updates. We'll start with the Maryland Travel Survey to travel by motorcycle, and Mr. Robert Berger will present the findings of this topic. Robert?
Okay, can you share this? Let us share the screen there. Trying again. Okay. We have it. It says I cannot see it. There we go. All right. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
No, it is not up yet.
That's bad. Wonder why. I don't see it popping up as an option. Oh, brother.
Would you like us to go to the next presentation and circle back?
Hold on one second. Todd's here.
Okay.
Well, I gotta try to make this work. There. Okay. All right. Does everyone see the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Okay. All right, good morning. My name is Robert Berger, and I work in BNC's data analysis group. I'm also the manager of BNC's household travel survey, which became the Maryland Travel Survey. Today, I'll be sharing the results of a study of travel by motorcycle. This is a demographic analysis, and the results are presented for the Baltimore region rather than individual jurisdictions. It was my judgment that doing both a demographic analysis and a jurisdictional analysis would have produced an overwhelming amount of detail. Excuse me. All right. First, I'll describe who is riding motorcycles by age group, household income, and race and ethnicity. Next, I'll describe the trip purposes that motorcycles are used for. Finally, I will take your questions and comments, which I ask you to please hold until the end of the presentation. All right. Somewhat surprisingly, the largest shares of motorcycle riders are those, well, maybe not so surprisingly, are those 18 to 44 years old and 45 to 64 years old. A smaller share of motorcycle riders are 65 years or older. There were no motorcycle riders among any other age groups. Okay. And that is just a slide which repeats what I just said. Okay. The largest share of motorcycle riders are those with the highest incomes, 150,000 or more, and that's 64.5%. The next largest shares are those with household incomes 100,000 to 149,000, so just below the highest incomes at 13.8%, and 75,000 to 99,999 at 10.2%. Smaller shares are represented by those with household incomes 35,000 to 49,999 at 7.4%, and 50,000 to 74,999 at 4.2%. And this is a
Excuse
slide.
me, Robert, are you advancing your slides?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Are they advancing?
They aren't on my screen.
Oh, well, they are on mine. Yeah.
But can you, maybe the issue, Robert, is it's not in the presentation view?
It is.
Okay.
I can start it again.
No, wait, come on, we don't want to repeat all that.
No, we'll just.
Okay, it's moved ahead now.
Okay, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Like this. All right. Okay. And this study may almost be over. Yeah. Okay. All right. The largest share of motorcycle riders are actually whites at 95.5%. The second largest share of motorcycle riders are African Americans, blacks at 4.5%. And no motorcycle riders were found in the following groups, which is surprising. Hispanic, 0.0%, Asian, 0.0%, multiracial, 0.0%, American Indian, Alaskan Native, that's less surprising, 0.0%, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, 0.0%. Okay, and we're winding down here. The largest share of motorcycle trips are for work, actually, at 30.4%. The second largest share of motorcycle trips are for school, which is not much different from going to work. The second largest share of motorcycle trips are for personal, business, and other. And the fourth largest share, well, the fourth largest share of motorcycle trips are for shopping and meals, not too surprising. And the fifth largest share of motorcycle trips are for social and recreation. And we are pretty much done, but I did want to mention one thing, which I hope does not seem like an intrusion. This study is dedicated to a former housemate of mine when I was an undergraduate at the University of Maryland, Mike Lux. He used his motorcycle like you and I use our cars, but he also rode for pleasure. And several times he offered his housemate, me, a seat on the back of the motorcycle for those pleasure rides. And it was a lot of fun. That was short and sweet. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Robert. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next presentation, which is for the demonstration of draft crash data dashboard. And Mr. Charles Baber will demonstrate this latest dashboard in a series from a UPWP task. Charles?
Sorry about that. Good morning. So hopefully you can all see my screen, correct? Yes? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we
So I just wanted to quickly just remind you that we developed some planning area dashboards, part of a UPWP project last fiscal year. They're now live on our website. And so if under transportation planning areas and then planning dashboards, it will bring up the dashboards so far that are available: air quality, a census data analysis, something from our travel model, the commercial vehicle model, demographics, freight, locally operated transit, bottlenecks, information on the TIP, and then finally output from the households from our travel model. Part of the planning area was also to do a crash dashboard that came from a recommendation, I think, from an AMPO meeting in Minnesota, or I guess it was Minnesota. Unfortunately, we didn't get access to the data while the consultant was still on board. And so between Cindy and myself, we've worked on developing a crash dashboard. And I'll share the link out with you shortly after I finished. But this is what we've developed so far. We're looking for feedback and input. How do you all want to use the crash data? What kind of dashboards would be helpful, or summaries would be helpful to your work? So right now we're just importing the state police database from January 2018 to 7/23. And we've created 3 views of that data set. It's quite a large data set. There's a database on the report, a database on drivers, passengers, non-motors, the vehicles, and circumstances. So it's a couple million records that we're importing here and doing analysis on. So the first, there's these blue buttons are kind of navigation buttons, how you can navigate to the views. And like I said, it's a little bit slow in performance. And I want to switch this back to count real quick. But the first view is just a high level summary by behavior types. This was a report that Cindy had shared, and so we're kind of just replicating that. So across the top is within the report, there's route type. And so if you look at the Tableau calls these tooltips. So if you hover across the icon, the little icon there, you'll discover that the interstate routes are interstate routes and US routes are RAMs. State roads are kind of Maryland routes or state routes. And local roads are county government roads, municipal roads, other public roads. And every police officer across the state, state police, local police, university police, Department of Natural Resource Police, so forth and so forth, is inputting information into this database. And so there was quite a lot of typos and interesting entries. But anyway, for route type under there's also something called RT and WB. I assume somebody meant westbound, not necessarily a route type. A lot of unknown and a lot of nulls. Down the left-hand side is the different behaviors, and if you once again hover over the icon, it will let you know how that particular variable is made up. And you can't sum this because these behavior types are not mutually exclusive. So, for instance, speeding is exceeding the speed limit or driving too fast. And if you look at the definition of aggressive driving and you look at the last sentence there, exceeding the speed limit and driving too fast is also considered aggressive driving. So those records are being counted twice. So you can only look at the row. You can filter by jurisdictions. You can actually select all jurisdictions across the state, or you can select multiple jurisdictions. So if we wanted to select Anne Arundel and Baltimore County, and like I said, it's a little slow in the performance, lots of records that we're importing. You'll come up with a number of fatal crashes through aggressive driving. Now this is being set from 2019 to 2020. And you can select the various state agencies. So if you wanted to look at Anne Arundel County Police, remember we only have Anne Arundel and Baltimore County selected here, or some of the university police departments, you can turn them on or off or leave all selected. You can change the time period. So if you only wanted to look through 2020 to 2022, and then you can also select the month. For month, I only gave you the choice to select a particular month. That's something that can change, easily changed if you want to if seasonality is helpful. So you wanted to select the winter months or the summer months, that certainly can be an option that can be added. Likewise with the day of week, right now it's only designed to select a certain day. But if it's helpful to you have weekend or weekday, that's something we can change pretty easily. And then right now you can get the total counts, or you can get the average crashes over the time period. And then for each facility type, it's fatal crash. And this is based on a hierarchy. So between the driver, the passenger, and the non-motorist, the most severe outcome. So it's either fatal, suspected serious injury, suspected minor, or possible injury, or there's no injuries and it's just property damage. That's how the records are being accumulated. There is one little issue with average. So I haven't figured out a workaround on this. I noticed this the other day. So right now this average is correct because it's being divided by 3, because there was a crash record at least one crash record in each year. So the years 2020 to 2022 is coming out correctly. But here on the bicycle, there was only one crash record in 2021. And so instead of dividing that 1 by 3, it's only dividing by 1. Okay, so that's the view on the behavior. Then if another view is to look a little bit more detail analysis in the behavior analysis, and then we'll bring up this view. It uses very similar types of filters. So whatever you set on the previous page, it kind of remembers. So, if we can set this back just to Baltimore, if we just want to look at Baltimore County. And then for the behavior, it's the same behaviors. So we have aggressive driving, motorcycle involved, so forth and so forth. So if we wanted this to look at, let's say, impaired driving, now the behavior by year, eventually after we stop spinning, is now set to impaired driving. And then the tooltip will give you a bunch of information about the number, what's behind the number, what jurisdictions belong, what agencies, months and days. If you hover over fatal, it will tell you it's driver, passenger, non-motorist. And then likewise for the total number of injuries, whether it's driver, passenger, or non-motorist, and then suspected to possible minor injuries. And once again, you can pick different organizations. Like I said, this is a very, very dirty data set. We're not making any attempt to clean it up. So you'll notice there's Baltimore Police, associated with Baltimore County. And looking at this real quickly, I think there are instances where the city police maybe responds to an accident across the city line. But there's other times when the person entering the crash record or entering into the database for the jurisdiction, instead of typing Baltimore City, they just typed Baltimore. And so that, even though that record's within Baltimore City, it's being allocated to Baltimore, the jurisdiction of Baltimore. Once again, you can change the month, day, a week. Then another view that we developed was classification of records. So right now, this is based on the driver, passenger, and non-motorist injury severity designation. And so that's everybody that's involved. And once again, that's a hierarchy. So whoever, if there's a fatal, if a non-motorist has a fatal accident, it's being counted in fatal crashes. The other view is to select only records where a non-motorist is involved. And in this view here, we're classifying the records by the most severe outcome of the non-motorist. So if the driver hits a non-motorist and only possible injury, but unfortunately swerves off the road and the driver is fatal, it's still this record's being, the way we're displaying it here in this view, is the injury severity of the non-motorist. And then once again, you can change the behavior. So let's go back to all drivers involved. And once again, this is so tool tips. Down to this below is the bars are kind of being stacked. So we have July for each particular year, or you can maybe say, if you just want to look at 2022, and then likewise, if you wanted to look at a particular month, you could turn on just March, and that would give you, and this is impaired driving. So it all kind of makes sense. Impaired driving instances are happening in the wee hours of the morning and happening concentration on the weekends. Another quick thing along the bottom of the ribbon, so if you like this particular view, or this is helpful for your jurisdiction, or you want to produce an output of it, you can save an image, a PDF, or a PowerPoint. You can also output a Tableau workbook. If you have Tableau, obviously that would be the easiest way. Just found out the other day there's something called Tableau Read. We have to do a little bit of investigation into. I think Tableau Read may allow you to download a workbook. You won't be able to edit or change it, but you'll at least be able to open up the workbook that way. So something to look at. And then two other buttons that are kind of important. There's a reset button, and then there's an undo button. If you hit the reset button, essentially it just resets all the filters back to the original state, or their top level. And then the undo button just simply undoes the last thing that you've changed, or last filter that maybe you've set. If we go back to home, we can then look at the crash record map. Once again, it's going to take a little bit of time to pull up. Like I said, we're reading in millions of records here, so takes a little time to process. Probably should have left it set at Baltimore County and not the state of Maryland. It would have maybe saved us a little bit of time.
Quick question.
Sure.
On that last screen, I saw an option for PowerPoint. What would that do?
I'm not 100% familiar, but like I said, it's probably, I haven't quite played around too much on that. I don't know if it just downloads a slide that you can import into PowerPoint, but something to investigate and look at.
Thank
Okay, so this is the crash records, and like I said, you notice there's all these crashes out in beyond the state of Maryland, and so we made no attempt to change anything, and they're quite well aware of a geocoding issue and problem. I will say that if you were to select the years and select the most recent years, you'll discover that most of records geocoded beyond the state of Maryland disappear. So it's something that they've improved over time. And then you can, once again, you can change agencies if you just wanted to look at a particular jurisdiction, let's say just Baltimore. And if you hover over the map or click on the map, you'll get a ability to zoom in or zoom out or go back to home, which would be the full extent. There's also some navigation, so you can click in and zoom if you wanted to zoom in on a particular area. There's also some. There's also a pan feature. So if you hold down the left, you're able to move the map or navigate within the map and refresh the map. We kind of refer to these kinds of scorecards. So whatever you have selected here in Baltimore County. So this is the sum of the number, and this is for all years, all months, all days of the week. So this is the number of drivers involved, passenger involved, and non-motorist involved. And then if you hover over, you'll get the injury status or the share of the drivers with no apparent injuries. And although this is quite logical, but clearly you can see having a piece of steel object around you helps you greatly in a crash. Likewise, there's a scorecard down here. It's counting the number of crash records, the number of fatalities, and once again, if you hover over, you can get whether it's drivers and non-passengers. This is the number of crash records. This is the number of persons that are injured, and then this is the property damage. So that's one way to look at it, and we're right now we're allowing you to filter by road name, although we're in the process of updating and changing this. Oh, I should also add you can look at if you just wanted to look at non-motorists. So where non-motorist, this is kind of helpful, I guess, to look at pedestrian problems or where there's hotspots. Obviously, you'd want to zoom in to look at where your fatalities or where your crashes are. You can also, let's switch back to all since that gives us a little bit more records. You can also filter out by road name. So let's say you're interested or you're only interested in working on the Baltimore Beltway. So you could either you could search for the Baltimore Beltway by scrolling up or down, or you can actually type in Baltimore, and we want to look at the Baltimore Beltway. And so we'll eventually get the Baltimore Beltway. And so these are all the crash records that have been identified on the Baltimore Beltway. And obviously, like I said, there's a lot of error in this data set. So if you notice, obviously this isn't on the Baltimore Beltway, but if you look at the description, it was on the Beltway, and its mile point was the Northwest Expressway. So these are all identified as Baltimore Beltway projects, but they have geocoding issues. And once again, you can look at the behavior. So if you wanted to look at motorcycle involved or speeding, you could look at issues where on the Baltimore Beltway where speeding was an issue. And you can try to filter, if you know the mile post, like I said, it's, that you're relying on them to have this semi-correct, you could try to zoom in or zoom out on a particular milepost. Another thing you can do is if you just wanted to look at the Baltimore Beltway and you wanted to look at fatal crashes, if you just select fatal crashes, that will filter out to just the ones that have a fatality. And then the best way to clear this is back down here, just to the undo button would undo the last thing that you did. So now we're back to all crashes. And just another thing real quick, I think trying to figure out the best way to demonstrate this, or just do. So in addition to filtering and selecting by name or selecting by severity or non-motors involved, year, day of the week, jurisdiction, agency, you can also select. Or if you wanted to look at, let's zoom in a little bit. So another way to zoom in is if you up and down on your mouse wheel will zoom in, zoom out. You can also select, this is by radius. So if you wanted to look at a mile out from that particular intersection, and that's going to select all the records there. So this is somewhat a work in progress dashboard. We did notice, although now they're, these guys are being updated based on that selection. And then once again, we want to do undo. Come on. Oops. Okay. And, or if you wanted to do, oops, I don't want to do that. Or if you wanted to, you can also do selection by lasso. So that would be more of a free form. Or another way to do it is do a rectangle. So that would select all the records by rectangle. And I think that's roughly about it for what we have. And I said home button will get you back to the full extent. And then home back to the original dashboard. Now we'll do, if you go back to my particular page, this is all the dashboards and we've played around with it, developed. You're more than happy for you to look at them, and or if you have a data set that you think would be great for a Tableau dashboard, more than happy to drop it in. But that's what we have for Crash, and I think would be interested in if you had any questions or comments or uses, or gee, I wish it would look like this, or we're interested in hearing your thoughts and opinion. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Charles. Does anyone have any comments or additional questions?
Hey, Charles David here, Howard County. So this is going to get published, or is it published already? Because I can't find it.
Charles?
Hello?
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry about
that.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, I'm not too sure where it will live, whether or not it will make it to our website. Someone else to determine that. But you can access, I did drop the link, this particular link to the view you see right now in the chat. And so if you click on that link or follow that link, you'll run into this dashboard.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Are there any additional questions?
Hi, I have a question. This is Daniel with the East Coast Greenway Alliance. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just wanted to ask about the non-motorist crashes. Is there any way to distinguish between pedestrians and cyclists?
Yeah, on the map, Yes. And so I think there's a ton of in the non-motorist, there's bicyclists, there's pedestrians, there's a couple other categories. So on the map in the behavior, come on, bring it up. On the map and behavior, I think what you could do is select on the crash type non-motorist, and then down in the behavior, there's bicyclist and there's also pedestrian. And so yeah, here we go. So if you were to filter that out to non-motorist and then filter the behavior, you could filter the behavior to just bicyclists or just pedestrians.
Thanks.
So that would, I think, accomplish what you're just trying to do.
Great.
Anything else?
All right, thank you again, Charles. Moving on, our next presenter is Miss Abby Morgan from Kittleson and Associates. This presentation will be about connected and automated vehicle integration for local governments. Abby will provide a brief overview of the purpose of this recently completed project, as well as provide a short summary of the final project documents. Abby?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to present to you. Are you able to see my slide deck right now?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. Yep, I'm Abby Morgan. I'm with Kittleson and Associates. I have been working on this project with Eileen Singleton and Don Hallington. We've been having a lot of fun, really thinking through what are some very actionable recommendations that we can make to local governments in the Baltimore region to help you prepare for connected and automated vehicles. For this project, we have been looking at technologies that are vehicle technologies that would help us communicate with other vehicles or with infrastructure, but really focusing on technologies that have components of automation. So if we can have other computer systems, vehicle sensors, and automated driving systems doing the driving performance of these vehicles instead of a human driver, human operator. What I'm going to walk through with you today is a brief update on our project, but starting with some understanding of why we're even looking at this right now. For a lot of us, the future Jetsonian vision of never needing to drive our cars anymore and always having an automated vehicle being able to take us absolutely anywhere, that future is still quite a long way off. But the important thing to keep in mind is that connected and automated vehicles are here today. They're on our local streets to some extent, but they're absolutely being deployed across the country in pilot tests and demonstrations and some more sustainable programs. The applications that we're seeing of connected and automated vehicles are not limited to passenger cars. We are seeing this technology tested on trucks, full-size transit buses, as well as some smaller vehicles like sidewalk delivery robots and even aerial drones that are being used quite efficiently for some small package delivery, especially in remote areas where there isn't as much of a roadway network. Here locally in the Baltimore region and in Maryland, we have seen some automated vehicle deployments. Perhaps you even took a ride maybe in one of the Ollie shuttles out at National Harbor, or saw one of the demonstrations at the MARC stations for some of the automated vehicle pilots. We've also seen a lot of work from Maryland DOT to help to equip some of its infrastructure with connected vehicle technology, like roadside units that would be able to communicate with vehicles or other infrastructure. There are examples locally of the city of Westminster doing both an aerial and ground scan of its city streets. So that really has a nice high definition map being developed that would help support automated vehicles in the future. And we've got some of the local deployments of the personal delivery devices or sidewalk robots, both at Morgan State University and Stevenson campuses. So really the important thing to understand is that there is a lot of this technology that is out there today. However, there are also a lot more applications that are expected in the future. We don't really know what the lasting impacts will be on transportation or land use once these deployments scale up. And for that reason, a lot of the local agencies are looking for guidance to help them understand what changes to the planning process, design, maintenance, or policy, even partnerships might be needed as we see more of these connected and automated vehicles. What we have done with this project is really to help identify what some of the impacts might be that we expect, identify best practices for local agencies to really take proactive planning so that we can maximize benefits, minimize any negative impacts, and really work to achieve our goals. So all of that was summed up in some actionable recommendations that local agencies can take. And that is what most of the documents that I'll be talking about today really summarize. Throughout this project, we've had some really great, positive, and productive involvement from a host of partners around the state. We had a steering committee where we met, reviewed some of the document content and ideas, and they provided us with a lot of input that really helped to improve the products that we created. The steering committee consisted of both state and local partners. And in addition to the steering committee, we also did a number of interviews with local and regional and also industry partners. So this included, for example, the Department of Disabilities, where we were really focusing on what are the needs of travelers if there is no driver and yet a passenger needs assistance putting on a seatbelt if they're unable to do that on their own. How do we think through and plan for those types of needs that we might not experience yet today while we've already got drivers or operators to help people? We also had some neat discussions with our first responder partners, law enforcement, firefighters who are starting to deal with some of the situations on the road. We're seeing other examples in other cities like San Francisco, where normally if you have an issue, a vehicle's disabled in the road, there's a driver there that you can speak with and figure out a plan to get it out of the road. If there's no driver, what do you do? We can figure out solutions, but we need to plan in advance for them so that we're not just sitting around scratching our heads when we see it for the first time on the streets. So what we've created here is some guidance for local agencies and local governments to take action. And really, it's the local governments that play an important role in guiding the way that we want connected and automated vehicles to be implemented. The local agency is the one that sets the traffic enforcement, can enforce speeding. Also, the local agency is who is going to update the plans. So think about land use plans related to parking, electric vehicle charging. Many of these vehicles are electric. There's also some ideas for building repurposing. If we no longer need to park our vehicles because we are using shared automated rides, could we repurpose parking structures? And what would be the building code changes that might be needed for some of that? There are also some roles that local agencies play in local street design. So in addition to thinking through ways that we can optimize the systems, maybe make a connected and automated vehicle only lane, we also want to think through some other strategies like adding bike lanes. Are there ways that we can just separate different users on the streets that would benefit all drivers, human drivers, as well as automated driving systems? And is there any need for local street design changes? Local governments are also very important when it comes to operating and maintaining local infrastructure and that state of good repair. So what are the types of investments that we can make that will benefit all users, our own drivers, cyclists, as well as automated vehicles, things like pothole repair, very good and clear striping and signage, and other infrastructure investments. And finally, we really want to work with local agencies, like I said, to proactively prepare for connected and automated vehicles so that we get the impacts that we want to see. There is some concern that maybe we would have a lot of zero occupancy trips where there's no one in the car and the vehicle's just moving between trips. Local policy can help to address that and incentivize different behavior. Local policy is also very important for ensuring that we have equitable solutions, equitable deployments of these technologies and access to the community. So what did this project create? There are 4 main documents that were created for this project. When you receive the slides after the meeting, all of these have a hyperlink directly to those documents. And later in the presentation, I've also got a QR code that you can click on if you want to access. The first document was a literature review. If you're interested in understanding a more in-depth discussion of technology and impacts, go to the literature review. It also has some best practices and what we're seeing other agencies take for their local action. The 3 main documents I'm going to talk about today, though, are the CAV planning guide, the Connected and Automated Vehicle Planning Guide, where we really focus here on some of the short, mid, and long-term actions and policies that agencies can take. To help you figure out how to work through that guide and to give you a step-by-step process, we also created a user guide that staff can use to really implement these best practices and start to take action. And finally, there is an executive summary for your leadership. This will be a great tool for you to share with decision makers or elected officials, talking point level overview of why we need to start planning for connected and automated vehicles today. So first, let's start with the planning guide. Long link here, but we've got the QR code, and I'll let you know that if you also just Google BMC CAV, this pops right up for you and you can check it out. So the planning guide is the major document, the major guidance. What we've got in this planning guide is an overview of the technology, definitions for connected and automated vehicle systems to help you kind of just set the same baseline, understand what it is that we're talking about. We also have a lot of discussion on what the impacts would be, both the benefits and the potential challenges related to this technology. And to help you understand why it's important for local governments to start paying attention and take action, even though we might not see these vehicles everywhere on our streets yet, we do walk through role of government. So what are the different roles of government from the federal level, state and local, as well as industry? So if we think about this, industry is the one that's developing and really deploying this technology. They're in control right now on how the pace of development and what we're seeing through the applications. The federal government is regulating safety of these types of vehicles. The state government is issuing permits, figuring out liability for some of these vehicles if they're involved in a crash. But it's the local governments that are experiencing the direct impacts and therefore need to really think through how they want to incentivize the implementation of these technologies to achieve local goals. So the main guidance of this document are those recommended actions. These are short, medium, and long-term actions that local agencies can take to really guide that implementation. The way that these, the guidance and these actions are organized in the guide is through impact areas. So we thought through what the impact areas we would see, and then we've given specific recommended actions through each of these impact areas. So probably safety pops to mind, and we had a great presentation just before on the importance of focusing on transportation safety for all road users. Another thing that's important for us to consider when we think through connected and automated vehicles, though, is this is not only for personal mobility. It is probably unlikely that it will be for personal ownership anytime soon, as this technology is still very expensive. We're seeing it more in a ride-hail shared vehicle type of a fleet deployment for personal mobility. But where we are also seeing this technology is in freight and goods movement. And so as you think through some of the impacts, please remember to think that it's not only ride-hail applications. What would happen if this is deployed in freight and goods movement? If this is deployed at ports, to move and offload vehicles or travel through through ports or loading facilities using automation rather than a human driver there. And again, as I said before, the idea we really want to emphasize is that if we are proactive about how we plan for this technology, that gives us the greatest opportunity to maximize our benefits, to minimize any potential negative impacts that we might see, and really to get the implementation that we want out on our streets. So what does this guide look like? Do not worry, this is not an eye chart for you, but just trying to help you understand what you would see if you do download this guide. For each of those impact areas, we've got some reference sheets, 2 pages. It outlines what those short, medium, and long-term actions would be. It estimates the potential level of staff effort to complete each of these actions. And it identifies who the responsible agency or organization would be to take that action. We've also provided you with some references where you can go to learn more information, as well as some case studies, just to help you understand who has done this before. You may not be the first one to have to test out some of this, these new actions or policies. They've been done before. So, quick example, what we're talking about. As you could see from those prior slides, there's a lot of information in this guide, but really we want to think through what might be some of those potential impacts and how would you think through opportunities and challenges. If we think about safety, really the goal is to help us reduce crashes. Connected and automated vehicles are never distracted, certainly an improvement over a human driver. They also might give us opportunities for travel and mobility to increase roadway capacity. Think about having a shorter following distance because of the sensor technology compared to a human driver's reaction time. And hopefully connected and automated vehicles will also help us increase accessibility. This is really helping us provide new mobility services, especially for people who don't drive. So we want to try to find ways to maximize those benefits and those opportunities. At the same time, we need to plan for what might be some of the challenges. If we don't have to drive our vehicles anymore, if we don't have to park them ourselves at home or work, might we see more vehicle miles traveled, especially if trip costs decrease to us or just the level of stress decreases. We don't want to necessarily see a lot more vehicle miles traveled if we think through congestion and other issues. So we might want to proactively plan for that. We also want to have really good partnership and coordination with the public to understand if there are any new inequities that come about because of these systems. Are there challenges if these are only accessible through smartphone apps with a data plan? Might it be more difficult for some of our community members to access them if they're just not smartphone users? And so what types of inequities might we start seeing while we think we're finding solutions? So again, early planning, early thoughtfulness around these technologies will really help us achieve the benefits that we want for our community. So like I said before, industry is really driving and developing the deployment of the technology, but local governments can help to influence and incentivize the outcomes you want to see. Here's just some examples that we give of 3 different policy approaches you might want to consider. And I'll say these may not be mutually exclusive. You'll probably have a combination of some of them, but just to keep it simple, there is, of course, the reactive approach. Local agency does nothing. Let's just see what happens. If we don't take any intervention, what might we see? Again, maybe that's more of that zero occupancy trip, lots of robo-taxis traveling around with no one really incentivizing them to pull off on the side of the road while they're waiting for the next trip. Instead, we might use a policy strategy, using local or state policy to achieve our goals. Might we see a user fee? Again, if we don't want to see those zero occupancy trips, might we charge a user fee for any of those 0 vehicle miles traveled? And what if we took a high investment approach? So now we're investing in our public infrastructure, things like maybe basic things that benefit everyone, pothole filling so that these sensors don't get out of alignment and really have a lot of hits if we've got really rough pavement, very clear striping and signage, or more of a technology investment into things like roadside units to benefit connected and automated vehicle technology. So some scenarios that local agencies need to plan for, and because all of this costs money and it's not just available today, this is why we want to take an early approach to thinking through what our needs might be in the future. So the outcome and the guidance of the connected and automated vehicle planning guide are 11 near-term actions. Again, we've got medium and long-term, but let's start with what we want to do today to realize the benefits. And there are 11 near-term actions that local agencies can take. Some of this focuses on partnerships that you'd want to develop at the state and local level. As I said before, remember freight from the start. Don't forget that there may be freight applications and not only personal goods movement. And really think through what this technology could be, as well as the different types of applications you want to see to define your vision and goals for connected and automated vehicles and other emerging technologies. Once you've got those goals and those partnerships in place, you might want to start updating your plans or your local land use codes, travel demand models, to think through how you're understanding and guiding the type of deployment that you want. Think through the impacts that these technologies might have on resources, like your revenue resources. You can use that information to prioritize investments. And it's really important to remember, get smart. There is going to be new data coming your way. How do you do safe data storage? What are cyber security good practices, as well as threats you want to think through? And now is the time to start planning for that, because it's going to take quite a bit of resources to train up your staff. So where do we begin? We've got the planning guide that I just walked through. The next document that you want to be aware of is that user guide. And so for the user guide for each of those impact areas, we've got a page on the user guide that helps you understand, again, near-term recommendations. What are those actions you would want to take? Who's the lead agency that should take action, or department within your agency? Quick checklist that you can check off step-by-step actions you'd want to go through and take. And all of this is provided to you in an editable PDF. So you can go in, type this information, share it across departments with your colleague, and track your progress. We really encourage you to go back over time as you make progress and you start taking on new actions to keep updating this user guide. And this will really just help you walk through those 11 near-term actions that you'd want to take. The user guide, like I said, is also available on that website, so you'll have all of that. And your final resource is the executive summary. So here's that strategy. You want to get talking points, help explain to your decision makers, your elected officials, really thinking through, why do we need to be proactive about planning for connected and automated vehicles, and how do we get started? That executive summary will give you those high-level recommendations and talking points to share with your agencies. And so finally, where do you begin? So please first go share that executive summary with your leadership, with other decision makers and your colleagues. Take a look and please read that planning guide. I think that is really where it's going to be, that deep dive, help you understand what your resources are and the actions you should be taking. And then work with your colleagues, work across departments in your agencies to really start walking through the user guide. The user guide, again, gives you that step-by-step approach. What should you be doing now to start taking action? And if you aren't already a member, really encourage you to join the Maryland Connected and Automated Vehicle Working Group. There are many subgroups of that committee that really will focus on some more specific interests that you might have, policy, emergency responders. So go and check out the Maryland CAV Working Group. There are many great resources that they also provide for you. And so with that, if you haven't already, I will drop in the chat right after this a link to these documents. There's also this QR code to help you get to the Baltimore Metropolitan Council website where you can get this. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them today. Please also, after this meeting, reach out to Eileen Singleton, who has helped manage this project and is a great resource and has a lot of knowledge on connected and automated vehicles. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions you might have.
Thanks, Abby, so much for that detailed presentation. I didn't hear any questions, so we will move on to other business. The next technical committee meeting will be on Tuesday, September 5th, and that will be a virtual meeting. This meeting is scheduled after Labor Day, so hopefully everyone will be able to attend. Is there any other business that needs to come before the technical committee?
Yes, if Todd, if you'd like to step in, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair, would like to give an update on the carbon reduction funding program. This is a program we first informed the technical committee and the BRTB back 16 months ago. Funding has been allocated by states and by urbanized areas. There's roughly $4.5 million available to the Baltimore urbanized areas for both fiscal year 2022 and 2023. I'd like to remind everyone that there is special language in the new Infrastructure Act that gave project selection authority to the metropolitan planning organizations in MPOs that are larger than 200,000, as is the BRTB. We've been working with the state in trying to utilize these funds for different types of projects, for purchasing lots vehicles, for looking at bicycle pedestrian projects. Unfortunately, the state looks like they want to utilize these funds from their existing program. We are still actively trying to advocate for these funds for locally operated transit systems and bicycle pedestrian projects, but the state is not listening to our entreaties, and they are taking the stance that they will be proposing a project, and the level of coordination and cooperation is that they will be asking you for a TIP amendment for these funds. So I wish I had better news, but again, we are still continuing to advocate, saying that these funds should be allocated by the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board per the language in the IIJA. And we will be reaching out to our local jurisdictions to make sure that they understand some of the opportunities with these funds and what MDOT is proposing to do. I've not gotten a formal proposal, but that is the word that I've heard so far. Again, we're very disappointed. We think these funds could have some good uses at the local level, but we will try to give you an update as soon as we can after further discussions with MDOT. Are there any questions about the carbon reduction funding and its utilization? If not, I will turn it back to Regina, who will introduce the rest of our other business. Thanks.
Todd, I have a question. David.
Yes, question?
So you don't have detail on what SHA is proposing, right?
They have indicated that they want to utilize it in an existing project in the CTP that could be allocated and obligated very quickly. Now, of course, we've been talking about these funds for 16 months, so the immediacy of their need to obligate funds 16 months after we've discussed it is very frustrating. We know that lots vehicles can be obligated very quickly under existing contracts with the Office of Local Transit at MTA. That's what we've been saying. And again, there just seems to be some resistance at MDOT to the MPOs making project selection authority or even kind of listening to the recommendations from MPOs at this point on these funds. Again, we're very frustrated.
Gotcha. So will the tech committee just be presented with an opportunity at some point in the future out of the blue with a resolution to amend the TIP, or is MDOT going to actually provide information to people on what they're proposing before they do this?
That's what we've been asking for, yes. So we've been asking for coordination for them to kind of bring forward, and have a discussion about the utilization of these funds. They've been doing it with staff behind the scenes. We want to bring it out to the membership because, again, MDOT is planning on making project selection authority on these funds and then bringing it to the BRTB as a resolution with the recommendation of the project from MDOT. And that will be the MPO's opportunity to weigh in on the projects. So again, these funds are not in the current tip that was just approved. We thought that there would be more discussion, but that is what we are hearing right now, and we may kind of work with you all to try to advocate with MDOT to make these funds accessible to other projects in the region other than work that they are currently proposing.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks. Regina, can we turn it back for other business? I believe Don Halligan has a request.
Right,
Actually,
we were
need
going to
go
do that under the closed session.
Yeah, sorry.
So Angie,
Okay.
if we could get a motion and a second to close the business meeting.
All right. Can I have a motion to close the business portion of this meeting?
Howard County moves.
There a second?
Paul Marcetti seconds.
All right.